Hey, welcome to your weekly Corner Späti. And before we head into the main episode with our guest Hovsep, I just quickly wanted to say that this episode ended up being about 4 hours of content, and a lot of which we decided was worth keeping, so we thought that we would cut it up into two parts. So the first part that you're going to be listening to is primarily the meat and potatoes surrounding the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the blockade, and so forth. And the second part is some other, other details that then our guest Hovsep wanted to, of course, share. So if you are not already a member of the Patreon, the link will be below. It is €5, and whatever the equivalent of that currency is to you, to join monthly, and you get all back content and, of course, then a weekly bonus episode from your good buddies over at Corner Späti. So once again, thank you to Hovsep for coming on and, really having a fantastic conversation with Ciarán and myself. And yeah, join the Patreon, and the bonus episode, the second part of this conversation, will be available on Tuesday. So take care and enjoy the episode.
Hey, welcome to your weekly Corner Späti. It is me, Ciarán, and I am joined by Nick.
Hello. Sorry, I was taking a swig.
That was an opportune moment. And we have special guest, Hovsep. Hello, Hovsep. Say hello.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah. All right. So we are talking about Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, because this is one of those things that I wanted to talk about for a very, very long time, but also we try to be a fun podcast and keep conversation and topics a bit light, which may happen at points in this conversation, but also might not. And unfortunately, this week I was absolutely floored by a cold and a toddler jumping on my face. So I'm going to actually turn to Hovsep and recommend where do we start with this behemoth of a topic?
I mean, it can go way, way back. We don't have to go all the way back through the history, but I think a good place to start is just, what happened in September.
Right.
So in September, there's the region which is called Artsakh, where Armenians live. There were 120,000 Armenians who live there. Actually, maybe it would be good to start with the Second War, because that's where this region kind of became, I guess endangered, let's say, or put in danger. So there was the 2020 war, which was also called the 44-Day War. And what ended up happening was that Azerbaijan launched an offensive against the region. There was then a 44-day war, and Azerbaijan took over some of the land that Armenians had lived on. And since then, there had been kind of like a peace agreement, and I say that in loose quotes, like a peace agreement, basically to stop hostilities. But I mean, it was a very bloody war. There were a lot of, in this day and age now with technology, there are a lot of videos that make it to the internet, and there were a lot of war crime videos, the vast majority of which were Azerbaijani, and I think this kind of inflamed hostilities on both sides. I mean, especially from the Armenian side. Anyways, so there was this, eventually kind of let's say, pause in the hostility. The Russians came in and kind of brokered a peace. So they had Russian peacekeepers stationed there. And that held for a certain time. But then in December of 2022, a few years later, there was basically an attempt to blockade the only road that goes into Artsakh from Armenia. And there was regular traffic going to and from Armenia and Artsakh. And so to understand the geography, Armenia is it's separated basically from Artsakh. And so there's only one road, and it's a very mountainous region. So there's only one road that like goes to and from Armenia. You block that road, you block off access to Artsakh, because Artsakh is surrounded by Azerbaijan.
Yeah. Undisputed Azerbaijan territory, basically.
Yeah. So, yeah. What ended up happening then was that there was people trying to block the roads. Then all of a sudden there was and again loose quotes, eco protest that was launched, which for those familiar with the state of Azerbaijan, a type of protest like this that does not get quashed right away is it's not a real protest. So it's like I don't know if you'd say it's like astroturfed or something, but it's basically like
something's maybe allowed to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the state was like, okay, we're gonna launch this eco protest against the Armenians to close down the road because of like I think it had to do with like they were like dirtying the water because of like some like mine chemicals runoff or something like that.
Oh, Azerbaijan really cares about
Well, really have a dressing in front of like a giant oil rig.
Yeah. So I mean this whole thing went on for months, and it eventually it got like some international attention. Even like the Red Cross was like, whoa, Armenians could not. So like there was daily like tons of food, medicine, like all this stuff, because none of this stuff was like really being made in Artsakh, right? And there's also there's a hospital in Stepanakert, which is the like main city there. They needed to get their supplies from Armenia, and when this was blocked off, that meant that like you had people who basically had to rely on subsistence farming and just whatever like things they had around the house. So I mean, I don't want to get into details, but if you're a woman, that means that you are going without certain sanitary equipment. Or if you have a hospital, that means that you're not getting medicine to treat your patients or anything like that. I mean, like there's also this kind of talk about like now with what's happening in Gaza, that like stuff cannot get through.
Yeah.
And this was like a very similar thing where it's like there was literally nothing that was allowed to go through. Yeah.
And this is also like, so we're talking 2022 then, right around this time.
Yeah.
And there was also like
the end of 2022.
Yeah. And so I have a pretty clear memory too of them just like the constant just Azerbaijan just shutting gas off just all the time. They would just for days just be like, during the middle of winter too and stuff like that, in an area in the middle of the Caucasus.
The mountains.
Yeah. Just be, okay, whatever. Yeah. Gas shipments not happening. Yeah. And this it wasn't just like a one-time thing. It would just be over like, whenever Azerbaijan was just kind of like, at least it seemed like in the way, getting pissy about something, gas off. And Europe wouldn't really report on it all too much, or if they did, it would be just like, oh, concerns over this and that and that. Never like, I mean, the UN obviously would like make statements on it.
The EU loves being concerned about things.
Yeah. The EU loves being concerned when their newest gas partner, is doing bad things that they just like turn a very blind eye to.
Why is everyone with gas like this? Just why?
I mean, an important part to that too is that Azerbaijan could do that, and the reason why is because that territory, so that like gas pipeline that would bring in gas to Artsakh, originally Armenians held that territory, and so when after the second war in 2020, the 44-day war, that meant Azerbaijan had they took that part of territory where there was this pipeline. That meant that they could just easily shut off the gas.
Right.
So I mean, this happens, and it would happen days at a time, and there were times where it was below freezing temperature. And so, you'd have people where it's like they'd have to heat their homes with like, old cabin, like get some wood, make a fire. Also with like cooking. I mean, imagine, you have to cook over an open flame. I mean, it made things, I think it's like kind of to show like, hey, we own you, this kind of thing. Like we can do this whenever we want, and no one's going to do anything, so yeah.
My quick question before we start getting into the more modern things is then how does then this region of how does an Armenian region end up in the middle of Azerbaijan? how do we get here? How do we end up in the sense of then the recent current events?
Yeah, so you had around like the time that they were starting to figure out the different sort of where all the republics going to be, and in the USSR, they had Armenian SSR. They drew the borders there, and then they had Azerbaijan SSR, and they drew the borders there, and there was this region, Artsakh, which of course they knew it as like Karabakh. They noticed they had done demographic research, and they noticed it's over 90% Armenians there, but they also noticed geographically, or even I guess you could say topography, that it was more economically connected to Azerbaijan in some ways. And they also noticed, it's been said, I've tried to find out the specific region, why did they draw the borders this way? And they said back then, there were shepherds who had their herds, and they had to traverse across this land, and so they couldn't pull the borders of Armenian SSR all the way out to there, because they're it's this is economically connected there, and this just wouldn't make sense, and there are these shepherds, and so it's this really kind of minimal thing, but I think they kind of made a compromise, and they said, we'll make this an autonomous region, but extend the border of Azerbaijan SSR around it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will make these, they have these theories this was a sort of pre-planned thing in the case of a breakup of USSR, that, it'll create this, war, I guess, between these people, and then they'll want to, come back to, the USSR or Russia, basically.
But it just kind of sounds like a typical. Well, it sounds like two things. One, when you draw these borders, it doesn't seem like a huge problem when you kind of take it a given. Well, this is always going to be the same country, right?
The USSR is going nowhere, baby.
Yeah, basically, because because you're talking about, this is obviously done when the end of the revolutionary period ends. So we're talking 1920s probably. And they're probably just going to assume that this is bureaucratic. This is administrative. This is this is less of a existential crisis, because it's always going to be the USSR. So we'll be fine, and we can kind of there's hatred and stuff, but we can paper over that with the central government if we need to. And then
these are just bourgeois chauvinist tendencies entering our glorious Soviet
these
republics.
Bourgeois chauvinist shepherds. The second thing is always this the kind of inherent problems with nationalism, where you kind of just pretend everywhere is France, and then there's this clear, because the first nation state, right? Because there's this clear line. People speak French here. On the other side, they speak Italian or German or Spanish or whatever the fuck. And it's no, it's not really how shit worked. Of course, there's a pocket of ethnic Armenians in a sea of ethnic Azerbaijanis, because they're and it's ignoring the history of France, where everyone who didn't speak, most people involved in the French Revolution didn't speak French. They just got rid of them over time.
Yeah.
Kind of thing of they spoke Basque and Breton and Occitan and whatever, but is this very kind of
France's most famous leader is not even French, all right? Let's just let's get that out of the way. France is a lie.
Yeah.
That is what Corner Späti is trying to tell you.
Position. But it's this very kind of neat idea of nationalism that by drawing a line on a map, you're just sorted. This is how it works. This is how the world works. It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
And not ignoring the complexities of I don't know, you have the Romanians, the Romance people who live in Greece or whatever and stuff. No one talks about them because there's 6 of them still. But Yeah, it's never
Yeah.
as clean cut as people like to think it is.
Yeah, I mean, especially like, yeah, I mean, it's like we were seeing this in the sense of, I mean, you brought up the Ukraine war earlier, in the sense of when people were figuring out that Ukrainian is not very wide spoken in Ukraine, and there's Westerners just like losing their mind. It's like, you know nothing about anything outside of like Germany or past Poland or whatever.
There was a lot of that in March 2022, where the entire section of Ukraine that spoke Russian was then labeled pro-Russian. I was like, that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I mean, yeah, I think that's one of the points, is that then Europe has these type of histories all over. The Caucasus are Europe.
Yeah, like, I mean, was it Denmark claims Schleswig-Holstein or something like that? Like, there's this
they
thing.
can have it.
It's yeah. I mean, there are these things.
So I mean, that's exactly the point. Is that then it's like, this is just one of multiple.
Yeah, we've got a Danish minority party in the Bundestag
Yeah.
because of this. Yeah. It's never, people pretend it's clear cut, and if you live in the core, if you live in like Baku, you can kind of pretend it's clear cut, but it's like never. When you go to the fringes of a country, it's never that simple.
Yeah, and I think that then like we briefly talked about this off mic, and yeah, I mean, like the destruction of the Soviet Union, which was supposed to be like, well, you have your nation state, you have a passport that's like kind of connected to this, but you are like, yeah, you're Armenian, but you're also a Soviet citizen, and this and that and that, and like your Soviet citizenry was going to serve, like, was far more important than that of the other one. Again, like you said, because the
USSR
idea of it, it's going to last forever. And then you have this complete disillusion, and it's like, yeah, there's just like, the reason why they lost their shit, we will not go into it, as we were debating also off mic of,
that's a whole other episode.
But yeah, I mean, it really kind of like the 90s shows into the sense of like all the nation building that then a lot of other Western European countries had did in the 18th and 19th century and whatnot, was all having to be like redrawn up again in, the 20th century, with then Europe being like, yeah, trust us, we've done this before, and then completely forgetting all the fucking bloodshed that came with all that stuff.
We just asked the Catalans nicely to speak French, and there was no problems.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's the thing too, is that then it's like, I think Europeans themselves forget that their nation building projects were insanely bloody. And it's like the 90s was just like, everything's collapsing, this and that. Nation building is becoming the hot new thing, this and that. And yeah, you have people who, just as was similar to Europe, scattered across, this and that, who rightfully claim these lands and, their identity and this and that, being in the case of recent, just being literally lifted out of wherever they are and, forced to go somewhere else, or militarily removed, or genocide, whatever you want to, put the label on for it. Yeah, I mean, it really is like, nation building is chaotic. And yeah, I mean, I think that it's like, it's always something that then's just insane to me, that Europeans just like, yeah, Germany just always existed. These bizarre borders between like the Rhine and France, which, don't ask why France's borders over there instead of what Germany probably thought it was in like the 30s or 40s,
I mean, even I think like you can see that, Germany was built up by like literally thousands of different tribes, and I mean, you can see,
Germany. Half the neighborhoods in Berlin end with a W being pronounced in a different way than we ever pronounce a W. Yeah.
Also, don't ask a German where they're from, because you will get a mouthful of, shut up, I don't care.
Gun to your head, German citizen. Explain what a Sorbian is right now. If you're from Brandenburg, you're not allowed to answer this question.
Anyways, I mean, like back to this region, I mean, like this region ended up, being created. I mean, not like necessarily created, but like, okay, it more or less like fell under like the, or was part of like the USSR, recognized as an autonomous region. And I mean, it's not to say that like, okay, after that or during this time that everything was like completely peaceful. Absolutely not. Like in this one city, Shushi, which I mean is in Karabakh, there was a huge massacre in 1920. And to put that around the time of when the Armenian genocide was also happening in the Ottoman Empire, I mean, it's just, you did have a lot of bloodshed then too. There was also an incident in Baku where, the Ottoman Turks came in and just laid wholesale slaughter against the Armenians as kind of a sort of reprisal to basically an Armenian massacre against, Azerbaijanis. So, I mean, like, there was a lot of this, like, bloodshed happening then, too. I mean, later, though, like, if we fast forward to, 1988, that is when, the first, pogroms started happening. I think, like, kind of the cracks in the armor of the USSR as a, sort of, like, grander, like, state, let's say, started forming. There were demonstrations in Armenia around that time, like between 1988 and 1992, because there was this movement called the Miatsum movement, and Miatsum means like united, and there was this sense of like people know the history, and Artsakh as a region is incredibly valuable to Armenian heritage and like the understanding of like Armenian culture, because there is just such rich history there. The Armenian alphabet was basically created and like had its like first instruction there, way back in like the 4th century,
right,
AD. There's also like one of the apostles who brought Christianity to the Armenians is buried under a monastery in Artsakh as well, under the altar in Darivank. And I mean, you have like literally, if you look at a map, like you can find it online, there are literally like hundreds of different sort of like Armenian cultural monuments there, and so the thing is like you have Armenia proper, yes, that's true, but Artsakh as like what it means to like Armenian culture and history, it's just so dense, it's it's rich. And so I think that's kind of the reason why a lot of Armenians respond to this, what happened in this like in these last years with like kind of horror, and seeing what Azerbaijan's doing with it now, is because of that, is because it feels like we're losing these like precious artifacts, these cultural touchstones, these this history, because it is really easy for them to commit what is termed as like cultural genocide, more or less, like destroy all these things, say they never existed, or reappropriate them and claim that they belong to them.
Yeah, and something that I've also very much kind of, you mentioned very briefly the Armenian genocide, which does play a lot into this too. I think that we're not gonna talk about hey, let me know about like
different episode again.
Yeah, can you describe that thing of why so many Armenians live in the United States, or
or Russia or France,
exactly,
or
France,
those are the three main diasporas.
Why did my family move from Turkey to the United States as well as a Greek person? I will never find out, but no, but I mean, in like the thing that then kind of I've always found that's even more interesting with the sense of then kind of like stepping into like the more modern, you mentioned like cultural genocide is exactly what this is, regardless in the sense of just like the actual killing of people as well too, that then has kind of come when the blockades and such like that, is that then it kind of feels even odder coming from like the politics of Azerbaijan are incredibly weird, because like Aliyev is like a dictator who's kind of more or less just like dictated, not even by himself, it feels like, more just from like that. We've always joked that then like Azerbaijan's like a Turkish satellite state in some cases. And there is like this really kind of interesting thing that kind of folds into it, where then it's like Azerbaijan's actions of recent, obviously, of course, most supported by, biggest allies, Turkey, No surprise there. Very good relationships with the EU and all the other allies of Turkey and NATO and such like that.
Israel,
Israel too. And the thing that then is just so odd is that then how maybe if you're aware of this or not, is that then like Turkey then just kind of getting really horny for the idea then of just like testing things on this region as well too, which was like also just I like the Bayraktar systems that everyone was thrilled about during the Ukraine war was Turkey's excuse to then use the what they probably view then as the continuation of the Armenian genocide. At least I'm going to be very upfront and just say that I think Turkey's interest in this is a bit more, there's a fervor and there's an ideology behind the Erdogan regime as well too. And I guess the question that then I'm kind of getting to is that then has this relationship worsened over years then because of then Erdogan's kind of like it's very weird to be talking about a country that then is like not directly involved with it, but I feel that then it's like Armenia is just there for then like Europe and whoever to get gas from, and they're a dictator that then we don't want to pretend.
You mean?
Azerbaijan, is a dictatorship that we don't want to pretend that we're really good friends with, and has a shit ton of human rights violations. But we get gas. That's fine. We can we sell weapons to them. That's also fine. But it seems like it's not even like an actual dictatorship. It is very much like there's no political. You mentioned the protests that were like faked, not faked is the wrong word. AstroTurfed. That's the better word.
I mean, I would say they were fake.
Yeah.
I mean, like those people, if you took them like aside one by one and said like, okay, like,
why
hey,
are you here?
like, hey, can you tell me like how this is harming the environment? They'd be like, oh, I don't know. I'm just getting paid to be here.
Armenia, sorry, not Armenia. Azerbaijan does do this, which is like insane.
But it's the hole I always poke in the recent UFO stuff from the States of like, oh, there's this guy from the military and he's a whistleblower. It's like, okay, why isn't he be treated like Chelsea Manning? Like, why isn't he going into solitary confinement for like 5 gajillion years?
Yeah.
Like, they don't allow military whistleblowers to exist. Like,
they don't allow protests in Azerbaijan. Why are you on the street? Yeah, exactly. How is then, like, it feels really weird to ask though, again, very long thing. How is then the current regime of Turkey influence this scenario in Azerbaijan? Because from at least my perspective, the more zealous Turkey has become in terms of their, the greater Ottoman project of the AKP, this and that, which they do not shy about.
Yeah. Usually you write it at the Kurds.
Yeah, or whoever else is the flavor of the week of who they hate. But like one of the most ironic things is the pro-Palestinian stance that like Turkey has in the AKP, but they hate Arabs, which is like one of the oddest ones. But yeah, so like how has there been like an empowerment of then this type of ideology of Aliyev and all this kind of stuff because of then like this NATO member? It feels like Turkey getting kind of puffing its chest out a little bit, kind of like feeling itself, especially after the Ukraine or during the Ukraine war, which we're still in. Turkey's position geopolitically is like all over the place, and I don't know. My interpretation of this is always kind of be as like.
I'm gonna try to put this question very succinctly because you did talk about this in some of the notes and stuff, and it's like basically what is the geopolitical relationships of Azerbaijan relating to the West, to Turkey, to Russia that basically allows it to get away with this?
Yeah, thank you.
As
Ciarán.
much as they've gotten away with it. Yeah.
I mean, I think first off, I would start with, Azerbaijan is a country that exports a lot of oil and gas. I mean, over 95% of its exports are what are called energy products.
Right.
That means oil and gas. And so, I mean, it's more like an oil company that is a state. And there's a reason why they call, it a, petro dictatorship.
Yeah.
It's because like it's that's just what they have to offer, more or less.
Yeah.
I mean, they have, other like agricultural things that they export too, of course, but not nearly in like, as, large of a mass or of like quantity as like oil and gas.
I remember classic Ciarán stuff. I remember the last time they hosted the Eurovision, and like that was really I think one of the first times they really tried to become like, we're also a tourist destination, right? Baku, and like the symbol that they used was fire, and it just constantly reminded everyone of oil rigs, like the burn off from an oil rig. Like,
yeah, I mean that's their slogan, "Land of Fire."
Yeah.
And it's and I read somewhere, and I don't know how true this is, but it's just like someone was saying like, yeah, like no, you can technically like ignite the land on fire. That's why it's called Land of Fire, because there's just so much oil
Please
there
do not,
or something
though.
like that. Yeah, it'd be like that thing that's in is it Turkmenistan that there's like that hole in the ground.
Oh,
It's like
yeah, that
the
it just
fire
pits
or
out,
whatever.
yeah.
It will not stop burning. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not like that, but it's I think also what's important to realize is that if you have a petro dictatorship, that means you have a lot of influence. Everyone wants what you have. And that also means you have lobbyists everywhere. You can pay lobbyists
They certainly do.
everywhere. And, I mean, we've seen the news stories in the last several years that have come out of, actually technically even like the last decade in, Europe about like
The last
European
days.
MPs, also last days, being bribed.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like this is also something that was revealed in the, I think it's the OCCRP report about there being a multi-billion-dollar slush fund that Azerbaijan has to, basically curry interest or with journalists, with foreign politicians. I mean, everywhere. Like no place is safe, necessarily from this. This money. Let's say.
Yeah, there was an exchange for voting in bribing 2 German MPs for an exchange for ruling or voting in Baku's favor in the Council of Europe, which is a big human rights organization within Europe.
Yes, 2 members from the CSU, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and there was also
Pikachu shocked meme.
Yeah, and there was also the one lady who died.
Karin
the
Strunz, I think.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a weird story, but one thing that
I'm not saying that our Azerbaijan killed her, but she's involved in the Azerbaijan scandal, and she died in a plane crash or something like that. Very
she died
random.
on board. Like the plane was fine.
Oh yeah. The plane was fine. She died on board. Mysterious.
I mean, one thing that kind of irks me though is that you have all these articles that come out, but still it feels like no one talks about it.
I think
it's still really like kind of swept under the rug.
Yeah.
It's it's not really like
I think
okay.
the thing that's always missing from like a lot of those articles, not necessarily when it's the OCCRP, the what does that stand for, like corruption, criminal corruption and stuff. It's like a investigative journalist outlet. But usually when that story gets broken there and then gets like reprinted in a handful of other publications, what is usually missing is like the context paragraph. You always see that in a lot of articles to be like, in case you haven't paid attention to Israel Palestine before, or UK, like Ukraine and Russia or whatever, or Northern Ireland or whatever, they'll always put in that little context paragraph, and that always seems to be missing from like every scandal time back to Azerbaijani lobby, and also like the Turkish lobby in Washington DC is huge as well. And it's never just like you'll get this little tidbit of like 2 MPs have been done for bribing with Azerbaijan, and they'll never mention that like a similar story came out a year ago or 2 years ago, and there is like a consistent pattern of this. It's always in isolation. It isn't like, ooh, this is a weird whoopsie doopsie.
Yeah, I think also something interesting you mentioned about Turkey too as well. In Washington D.C., I remember like back in like the mid 2010s or something, there was a protest outside because I think maybe it was Erdogan that was there, but there were like his bodyguards who were in the street and they were literally beating up these protesters. Videos of it.
Yeah.
And nothing happened.
Turkey's lobby in the United States is so weird. The one that I had to send it to you again recently because I was like, this is a Nick story, is the like, I think it was 2006, 2008 when like the Turkish government hired a flash mob to perform
to deny the Armenian genocide.
Yeah, in New York. And it's like it's you look at the faces of the smiling American 20-somethings who have to go to like an improv class after that, and you're just like, you don't know what you're doing. Like, you have no idea.
Yeah, they were on the island that the Statue of Liberty is built on, and they were like doing like a choreographed dance, and then above it there's like a Turkish flag like on like a plane flying by or something, and it was like
the skywriter wrote Armenian genoli or something.
Yeah. It was insane.
I think there was even some like fairly innocuous stuff, which it was just like visit truthaboutturkey.com, and it was like, I guess sure, maybe if I remember to do that when I get home, and then if you ever did, it was just like, and here's why Armenians are all liars, and you're like, oh, okay.
I lived with I lived with a dude, all right, complete Berlin story here, all right. I lived with the guy for 5 days who I moved out because I knew like he spent my security deposit on coke, and I was like, I'm out. I'm leaving. This is a horrible idea. He's like, oh yeah, I need this much for my security deposit.
City in the world.
And I'm just like, that's a very low amount for a security deposit. And then I was like, can I have my security deposit back? He's like, I don't have it anymore. I'm like, he spent it on coke. Like I moved in for 5 days, and then like we still followed each other on Facebook or whatever. He wasn't like a bad guy or whatever. I just got a weird vibe. And then like he just would not stop posting this website.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Which was then I was like, all right, I'm unfriending you now.
Yeah.
But would he like just obsessed about? I mean, like he was a Turkish German dude, obsessed about Armenian genocide denial. And I went on the website. I'm like, oh, I'm curious
they always have like the most innocent titles.
Yeah. And it's like, oh yeah, here's the truth on it. And then you're all like, oh, like if I knew nothing about this, sure, fine. Like, I mean, that's the thing is that then it's like the Turkey, like the money that then goes into these websites that are like all in like really well done, all in English, this
all
and that, for all professionally done. And it's like, yeah, if I knew nothing, if my family didn't leave the former Ottoman Empire, this would look really like convincing to me, And it is like, I mean, yeah, I think that there is a bit of that then plays to it too. Of that, then it's like, not saying that then Turkey and Azerbaijan are the same state, but it's like the marketing is like, it's there, they got the money to like. I mean, if you're a petrol state. Imagine the money that you got to genocide denial level of marketing or human rights violation denial level of marketing. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about like the Turkey lobby machine and all the money that gets spent on genocide denials. I mean, if you look at the state of Turkey today, where it's like, I mean, people can't even afford to like go grocery shopping in some instances and things like that. Like I've talked to Turkish friends who, back there, it's like, it's just really bad. And you think about it, wait, so this country's spending literally like millions and millions of dollars on trying to deny a history, and like people are in the street, and then you see like, Erdogan like riding by in a bus and he's tossing tea out of like the door. Like, it's just like, are you kidding me? Like, this is crazy,
Like, literally, that's what happened to probably Erdogan's son-in-law, is just like, we could fix all of the earthquake damage if we just take the money from the genocide denial budget, say the genocide happened, and we could just fix the whole region. It's like, no, get out. Basically, like, and he hasn't been seen since.
Yeah, he was like economic minister for like, I don't know how long.
He was the head of the the head of the central bank.
That's what it was. Yeah.
To be fair, last seen in a Turkish restaurant in London, but that was like a year ago now.
But anyways, I also want to get back to the point about like Turkey and Azerbaijan's relationship. There was this, speech that Erdogan gave in the summer right before the Second War, where, he mentioned, we will continue the mission of our forefathers in the Caucasus.
Yeah.
And to like any normal outsider, you think, I don't know, like maybe he means like, I don't know, some sort of economic plan. I have no idea. It sounds innocuous, right? I mean, to Armenians, this specifically meant like, okay, this means more genocide, so
we didn't do it, but we're going to keep doing it.
We're going to keep doing it. I mean, this is why you have genocide scholars who say like the last, phase or last stage of genocide is genocide denial. Like you're not out of it yet. you're still in that like mode of genocide. Right. So, yeah, the thing that was, I mean, interesting about, so there, I mean, there's that statement, and then when the war happens, you had, you know, I mean, the drones proved to be very effective against the Armenians. Well, when, you know, the war between Russia and Ukraine started, I mean, guess what videos, you know, Bayraktar used to sell Bayraktars to Ukraine? Well, videos of these drones killing Armenians.
Even, you know? What's her name?
Ulrike Franke.
Ulrike Franke, who's this like insane defense academic lobby talking head. Yeah. Is obsessed with drones. Like that is her beat is Europe needs more drones, baby. This thing that then is literally just to create nonstop terror, but doesn't actually have any more of a like usage other than that. Is that then it's like, yeah, we can kill your family from, you know, 40,000 feet up in the air.
It also gets to play into that myth of like we can fully like automate war.
Yeah. But in reality, it's like it just. I mean, like the reality of the problem with drones is that they're like in terms of strategic things, they do nothing for you but just create constant terror. And she uses the example of look at how successful these drones were that Azerbaijan used. Completely missing the second part of that, you know, why they were used, who they were used on, this and that and that. And yeah, it was a complete marketing thing for the year. I mean, she's speaking at the Munich Security Conference as well. Coming up in, I think that's next month.
Yeah, I mean, all this got a lot of PR to the point where there was even an article in the New Yorker talking about like, it was basically a profile piece on Bayraktar.
Yeah.
And also related to Erdogan as well.
Yeah, and I mean now, like he like married into the...
Yeah, he married into the family.
Yeah. But, I mean, to see that as an Armenian, like to just not even question, like, so, you know, these drones literally killed tons of people, you know.
But they're cheap.
And it's just like, but that's the thing. It's like, it's just such a liberal press sort of thing. It's like, to show this, like, to do a profile piece on a guy who manufactured these machines that went and basically, you know, killed a bunch of young Armenian boys. Like, we're talking literally like 18 to 20-year-old kids who had to, you know, fight against, you know, and defend their land, basically.
Yeah.
And, you know, this doesn't factor into any sort of thinking about, is this a good piece to publish? Might this be a little insensitive? Like, that does not, for some reason, that just does not factor into the thinking of, like, you know, the editorial part of, like, you know, the New Yorker. And I mean, that was something where I just found like, this is ridiculous. Like, what kind of reality am I living in here? You know?
Yeah, I mean, okay, now congratulations. Now the United States or whoever buys the Bayraktar systems can now attack a wedding for like half price now compared to what they used to be able to attack a Pakistani wedding. Like, I mean, it really is. Every ounce of all this is just so, I mean, you know, we can step aside from the defense thing, but yeah, I mean, there really is just like this obsession with, you know, trying to then remove the brutality of war and the brutality of all this stuff in the sense of, well, the drone allows us to become, you know, I can, you know, be in like, you know, Nevada in a strip mall and I can, you know, pick targets or whatever. There is a massive problem with the West's not even just dependency, but obsession with this method of conflict. And it is very interesting how then that, like, because this has come up as well with the Gaza, you know, the genocide in Gaza as well, has been that then the sense of how the West loves using then these, I mean, the best thing for the West was that no one was caring about, you know, Armenia and Azerbaijan and whatnot, that then it is a playground for then testing of technologies and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that was one that then really struck me as insane of yeah, exactly. Reading in multiple publications in multiple languages of this is the coolest system ever because look at how it murdered a bunch of Armenians. Like, don't you want that? Like, don't you?
Yeah.
Don't.
I mean, that was literally the subtext of the article.
Yeah.
You know, and even if they didn't overtly state it, and it to me, it's just like that's so dystopian. You know, I mean, especially for someone like me to see this. You know, and then not only that, but people say, you know, get all ginned up about, you know, the Russia-Ukraine war and be like, oh man, this thing's going to kill so many Russians. And I'm just like, what kind of dystopia is this? You know, like this is...
Yeah,
disgusting.
we are now starting to see though that like drones, when we use it, cool and good. Drones when, say for example, the Houthis use it, that's bad. Don't do that. So it is kind of I guess for a period of time, like particularly like the New York Times obsession with it, I feel like is very like the Obama era kind of love story with drones of like precision targeting, like our boys don't have to come back in boxes kind of thing. We found a way to do war, and I think one of the things that's like a chicken coming home to roost is for a while it was having drones was the privilege of rich countries basically, and the people that where they were being attacked were like poor and couldn't afford to have their own drones. And only now are we starting to see like the other side use drones and like, oh wait, this sucks, when it's actually being used against us. It's very gross.
Yeah, and I think what also compounds compounds it all is just, I mean, Armenia is a small country, less than 3 million people, less than the number of people in Berlin.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Armenian diaspora, I think, is like somewhere around like 8 or 9 million. Yeah. And, you know, there were 3,000 casualties in the Second War, and most of these were kids. And I mean, young. I say young boys, relatively, like 18 to 20 years old, region, usually. Basically. But yeah, I mean, and that doesn't even count the number of boys who came back with like, okay, they had to get leg amputated, they can't use their arm anymore, and so I mean, the economic impact of this long term on such a small country, I mean, it's going to be felt for a very long time. Mm-hmm. Because you just have people that can't work like they used to. And I mean, again, like you said, like these are these are technically, like, these people are the future of the country. And, so when I see like just that there's no sensitivity around this at all.
Yeah.
Or just no coverage really, a lot of, I mean, like the fact of that it's just, I mean, up until pretty much the press release of Azerbaijani victory was just released throughout everywhere uncritically. Too, just a complete like, oh well, that's over. All right, great. I mean, but
and even I want to talk about this too, because something that a lot was going through European press a lot was this discussion of, okay, Azerbaijan, they won. They needed this win. This will make things all better. Like their lust for war will cease. And I was sitting there, and I remember reading this and hearing this, and I was just like, what planet do you people live on?
Yeah.
Like, absolutely not. Like,
no, it's fine.
Europe, 1914.
The Chancellor of Germany just wants the Sudetenland. Once he has that, it will all be fine.
I mean, it really is. We literally end up at the same argument of of fucking World War I. We've talked about this now for I think 4 episodes in a row now of just Europeans love violence, and they're like, if we just fucking get this out of my system, I'll never want to kill again. Trust me.
Oh yeah, geopolitics is punching a drywall, basically.
I mean, yeah, it's like it just blows my mind, and that there's just absolutely no kind of second thoughts about statements like this. And then when hostilities do start again, it's like, yeah, well, both sides just need to get back to the, negotiation table. And it's like, are you fucking mad? Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is literally going to continue on. And to the point where it's like, Armenians are like, okay, we're just being gaslighted.
Yeah,
the whole time. Like,
kind of a thing that then I also wanted to ask then as well too is that then because we touched on this since how our Azerbaijan, gas partner of Europe, Turkey's best friend, Armenia's in a odder scenario because their best friend, if you would call it, or the only country who you mentioned the Russian peacekeepers who came by, and we can very much use peacekeepers in I think quotations because they were Armenia has a decent relationship with Russia, not the best.
I mean, they have a what's called like a military defense pact.
Yeah, they're also part of the CIS, I believe, but no one takes that seriously.
Yeah, although I can't remember if Armenia actually exited it. There's been some kind of movements that like are moves that like the Armenian government has made. Like they wanted to implement the I think it's like the Rome Statute, which like says like, okay, if Putin is in that country, then they are legally obligated to arrest him and things like that. But I mean, these things like take time to like ratify. But no, Russia and Armenia, they do have a military defense pact where Russia says it will come to the aid of Armenia if Armenian proper is attacked. Now that does not include the region Artsakh. So yeah, the thing is, Armenian sovereign territory has been, attacked. Has Russia done anything? No, they haven't.
They're doing something else at the moment, it seems.
Yeah, and I mean,
tell you what.
And I mean, the impression is that, there's just, it doesn't feel like, Armenia is essentially isolated. You have basically borders on both sides of the country, Turkey and Azerbaijan. Those are blocked. There's one tiny corridor to the south of Armenia that connects it to Iran, which becomes all the more important because, you don't have like those like east-west, transit because the borders are closed. And then you have the border north to Georgia. And Georgia's relations with Armenia are, I would say, tepid at best. So that means that this throughway down to the south to Iran becomes increasingly vital, and this is also an area that is now under threat. And I mean it's something where Turkey and Azerbaijan, it's fairly regularly that they host these joint military exercises. And there's this feeling that this southernmost province in Armenia, which is called Syunik, that will be kind of this new contested area. And the reason why is because Azerbaijan calls that area, well, they call the region that is just to the east of that, they call that East Zangezur. And by implication, that means that, well, what's west of it is West Zangezur, which is Syunik. So, and what that would do, if Azerbaijan were to take that, then that would mean that Armenia would be basically blocked on three sides of the country. Only the northern border with Georgia would be open. That's it. And so there's that, and there's more stuff about like this. There's this recent, spat about these like Azerbaijani or former Azerbaijani towns or villages, or like what they call like I guess they'd be enclaves, like within Armenian sovereign territory, and that they want them back. These are also strategically located alongside like major throughways, north and south, and so if Azerbaijan takes that, they can just do what they did with the during the blockade, set up a checkpoint, and then basically just not allow any traffic to go through there. And then bit by bit, they just chip away at Armenian sovereign territory.
Right.
So
the just want to talk about the blockade because we did talk about it at the beginning, but there's stuff that you've mentioned in your notes that I do want to come back to because, again, a lot of this discussion is going to be like, I haven't heard of this before. The only way you seem to be able to find out about any of this stuff is to like be Armenian, follow like one kind of like Armenian journalist account, that kind of thing. I mean, like I've done that now, and that's the only time I've heard about like, for example, the Armenian quarter basically being shut down in East Jerusalem. Like there's these ongoing things that are just like not covered at all. But moving away from that, I'd like to talk about the fact that you kind of mentioned in the notes and on the episode that like the blockade for the longest time was like denied by Azerbaijan, that they claimed it wasn't happening, and it took like someone at the UN or someone involved in the UN to basically call them out. And
yeah, I mean, basically what happened was there would be this like back and forth on Twitter where Armenians knew people that were living in the region, that were living in Artsakh. and they would speak to them. They knew that like, okay, there's clearly a blockade
8
happening.
million Armenians like in the whole world, right?
Yeah.
You said, or like was that like or 8 million in the diaspora?
In the diaspora,
Yeah.
and
So
then-
that's 12 million altogether. That's not a lot of people. Like,
I mean, not a lot of people.
no,
I mean, like,
you're gonna know someone,
yeah,
or someone is gonna know someone.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, you can even see it on like like sent some like Instagram profiles where you can see over the course of the blockade that people were becoming more and more emaciated in the face, or like and I mean, it's clear, you see it. But you had, people who were hanging out at the, Azerbaijanis hanging out like at the like blockade, and they were saying, oh no, this is all fake. Like, look, like, see, like there's a truck going through and stuff like that. And, they would try to, the thing is though, there were like literally hundreds of tons of goods passing through every day. Now you show a picture of like, oh look, a truck's going through. That's like how much? Like it's not a lot, right? It's I mean you're talking about like you're starving a population of 120,000 people. So I mean Armenians would say like, no, this is ridiculous. Like you clearly are doing this. Like we have the receipts more or less, and Azerbaijanis would deny it. They started this social media campaign where they were showing like they would basically go to like these social media pages like Instagram and show these like lavish festivities, but they would crop out the date. They would leave out certain details of like where it was, and they'd see like, no, look, see, like we've been, which is weird because okay, you're literally spying on people like through Instagram. B, you're literally like falsifying this stuff, and it's just like this stuff is like it's showing like weddings, it's showing these like get-togethers like birthdays, and you're using this as like evidence that like, hey, these people aren't blockaded, even though like the time periods of when these videos were taken were like from earlier, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's
Armenians
just like
can't be starving. They're having birthdays, guys. You would never have a birthday if you weren't feeling well. Like
and this was another thing too. Is like there were still like life was still going on there. It's not like it's like, oh, okay, we're living under blockade. Okay, well, let's just postpone the wedding. Like, no, like, you're not gonna do that.
Yeah.
I think that's such a commonality that we see in the sense of like it is something that then Europe loves fetishizing in the sense of when they do like genocide research, like particularly like concerning like the Holocaust. It's like how did these populations still live under the threat of fascism with the sense of like the threat of extermination? Like there's all these like accounts of like people living in like the ghettos and how like these very beautiful accounts of people living in the worst imaginable occupations and trying to keep alive their cultures under. It's like, of course people are going to do that. Of course, and then like people are going to like, try to preserve what they can when they're being threatened in that entire existence of their cultural identity.
I think
like
there's also this like,
not that then that the pictures weren't stolen of like that is insane, but like.
Yeah, but
God forbid they, they try to, celebrate something while being under, blockade, occupation, whatever, it may be, because that is a human reaction.
And I mean, it's not to say that like, there weren't like some families that had stockpiles of, I don't know, like rice or grain or
the subsistence
oil.
farming was
like,
good enough.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is like the subsistence farming, even to get to that. So, I mean, it, like it led to situations where like, I mean, I heard secondhand that, like the Armenians would have to work together and be like, okay, well, I grow this, like you grow that. And they'd have to like basically just kind of figure out how to make it work in the meantime. But I mean, there would be days where it's like a kid would be like, I'm lucky to have a potato to eat. Yeah. For the whole day.
But this is also like why subsistence farming is not practiced en masse anymore. It is to supplement a diet that is mostly supplied by like regular supply chains, going to a shop and having things delivered. It's it should not exist to feed a population.
Yeah, and I mean, like they couldn't just automatically adjust within the span of I don't know, like what, a month, and like figure out how to get all their daily needs fulfilled. Like absolutely not. And you know,
you can't subsistent farm like paracetamol. Like
and I mean, you can even see like there's I mean tons of photos and videos of like just literally hundreds of people waiting outside early in the morning before the bakeries open.
Yeah.
And they're waiting, and they're saying like, well, we hope we can get like a loaf of bread for our family. You know, it's. I mean, it's just like, how can you deny that there's a blockade happening? But, anyways, so, you know, this story kept going on and on and on, and I mean, one of the things that was shocking was just how few international like publications wanted to touch this. Like, that was something that to me was like, do you not see that this is happening? Like, it's clear. Like, I mean, for Armenians, it was very clear. Like, this is what is happening. This is what's going on. And it felt like no one wanted to touch it. I mean, there were journalists on the ground who were there who did, you know, cover it, and they talked about it. But, I mean, I don't, like, the New York Times wasn't there, you know, like, you know, I have to wonder, like, why is that?
That's fair. Like to me, it's always seemed very bizarre. Like, so like the two countries that we talk about in relation to this, or have talked about, is like Turkey and Azerbaijan. And Turkey's bullshit always makes sense to me. Like what Turkey's doing in northern Syria, what Turkey does to the Kurds, always makes sense because they're basically the second most important member of NATO. They have the second highest military in NATO, strategic position in terms of the Middle East and formerly the USSR. They were allowed and always will be allowed, as long as they're a member of NATO, to get away with all sorts of shite. However, that never really explained Azerbaijan. And the petrostate stuff explains a little bit of it, but like my understanding is, at least before Russian invasion of Ukraine, is that like Azerbaijan wasn't necessarily like super important to the Western supply chain of gas. Like Southern Europe mostly got it from, and still gets it from, North Africa. Central Europe got it from Russia, and now we're getting it from Azerbaijan. And we have these very unfortunate photos of Ursula von der Leyen being like, we don't support dictatorships. Here's a photo of me with Aliyev in the exact same fucking tweet. And like Azerbaijan, like the silence and the amount of shit that Azerbaijan was able to get away with always did like make me wonder. It was always kind of baffling to me. And I guess it's a very kind of, if someone has a better explanation, I'd love to hear it, because it feels very lackluster that like it's just the petrostate lobbying money. But like,
I mean, I think it's you know, one point that I think is also important to remember too about Azerbaijan, you know, this gas deal, is that the whole impetus behind it, the whole reason behind it, was to wean the EU off of Russian gas as a response to the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But it's been shown that, well, Azerbaijan is also repackaging Russian oil and
so is
sending
India.
Sending it to the EU. You just basically cut in another middleman. Like it's,
I can tell. You know, I can tell when my Azerbaijani gas is cut with Russian gas, though. All right,
just like turning on the radiator is like,
yeah, just
like something's a little off here. Yeah.
But it is because I guess the other, like, because there's such little there to justify it, because you're right, like, why aren't more people talking about it? Because you have the only other two explanations I can kind of come to, which is probably lack of journalists on the ground. We like talked about it off mic, but we see now with probably currently what's happening in Sudan, and historically what happened with the Syrian civil war, of like Western outlets are very ill-equipped to talk about conflicts when they don't have people on the ground. And it didn't...
Seeing with Gaza, too.
Yeah, which is why Al Jazeera is like one of the best. Like, But my second point is the weird thing that I always saw with very like pro-Ukraine online types, the NAFO people who like get into this a little too much. When they try to become like influencers online, which a lot of them have become, they always have to have an opinion on everything. And their explanation, when like from the very particular evil branch of the NAFO wing, is like, Armenia deserves it. because they sided with Russia. Is basically, and that is their explanation. And I'm just like, well, like, I can totally imagine a lot of liberal press not saying it so egregiously, but maybe some of them believe that in their, like, at the back of it, like, you weren't as eager about supporting Ukraine as you should have been, whatever. Like, whether that's real or not, it's just something they're feeling. That's like my least favorite explanation, but it's the only other one I can kind of like.
There were attempts from like bigger media sources when the Ukraine war started to like throw Armenia under the bus. Yeah, like that did happen. It wasn't like I mean, it didn't last because it's stupid.
Very early in March, there was like that photo that went around online of like a Russian flag, clearly photoshopped, draped over a bridge in Yerevan.
Yeah, I mean, even there were two people on the ground who like went to that bridge like that day, and were like, "No, this is clearly bullshit."
The Russian flag was bigger. Trust me.
No, I mean, there's also this article, funnily enough, posted. I think it was in the New York Times, where it was talking about how, I think it was that Armenia is aiding the Russian war effort with like a certain type of like, I think iPhones or something like that, some type of chip where they were saying like, well, this helps with like, you know, was it like guided missiles or something like that?
Yeah. I remember. I have a vague memory of this, but yes, they were trying to like connect the Pepe Sylvia dots of.
And I was just thinking like there's a whole article about this, but there's a whole lot of other shenanigans going on, but you choose to focus on this like one small country, which I mean doesn't even have the capacity to really even make a huge mark in like this huge war that is happening elsewhere. Like, to me, I found it very, very curious, especially since like, I mean, the New York Times, like any coverage of Armenia up to that point, there wasn't anything there. You know, it's just like, so you pick and choose like all this stuff to like just be like, I mean, I would say like very anti-Armenian in a way, you know, and it's, I don't know. Again, very, very curious, very strange.
And I think like a lot of Armenian, like journalism about Armenia, I should say not Armenian journalism, but like journalism about Armenian politics was always very lazy. I remember there was like one kind of like unseating of a prime minister there a couple of years ago, and like the entirety of Armenian politics just got labeled in the like very lazy terms of pro-Russian, pro-West. And that is the entirety of Armenian politics. You have to be one or the other. There can't be internal issues. Same with what we saw with like how a lot of Ukrainian politics got discussed until like being invaded forced a bunch of people in like America to have a conscience about like how lazily they were reporting about Ukraine. Which didn't happen with Armenia, apparently.
Yeah, this is the phenomenon that then I just always, and it comes up more and more with, again, we're talking about something completely different, but it's like the German position to Gaza is always a really funny one, because it's like everyone has agency in European and Western politics if they agree with me. Once they don't agree with me, well, then your agency doesn't fucking matter. You know, it's just like, well, yeah, France or Germany or the United States or Poland, for that matter, well, they can have complex problems and complex politics because they're complex Western countries. But yeah, God forbid Armenia or, you know, Syria or Gaza or, Palestine in general have complex politics, because they're the Caucasus or the Middle East, those are simpler folk. It's either like you either you do or you don't. There's no and this it's the oddest thing that it's like, if there's not a more false statement of regions that have more complex politics than the West, it is all these regions. It is regions that have been affected by Western imperialism and stuff like that. Armenia gets brushed under of just, they're a Russian asset because, they have one ally, more or less. Yeah. And then the state of, the city of Los Angeles.
I mean, this is why, like, whenever I see, like media, like, post this stuff, and then if I go back through their past coverage and I see, like, okay, what did they write about, like, the war, or like what kind of framing did they put? And then I see this, like, typical both sides stuff, and that tells me that's a dead giveaway for, like, okay, you didn't have anyone in the region.
Yeah.
You had no one who was on the ground. And also, you don't know anything. Like, you're showing me you don't know anything. So why do I care?
Copy and paste is a really hard thing of Azerbaijani press releases to do. So,
but like I do kind of think like the kind of like fucking Office Space kind of like dumb explanation of a lot of this, and as a huge problem with journalism in general, is journalism became such a fraught career that at no point can you, whenever you're given an article, you cannot say, oh, I don't know shit about that. You always, as a journalist, have to say, yes, I can write about that, or whatever. You always have to have an opinion on anything. Unlike, which is why this podcast is good, because I don't know anything about this, which is why I brought Hovsep here.
I read a book about like the Lebanese Civil War that was written by a journalist, and if I were to compare like just the amount of detail put into that book versus like what I see, that's surfaced like from the recent war, it's no contest. Like it's just like there's just not that attention to detail anymore. And like why I say like when people resort to this both sides sort of, like statement about the war, it just tells me it's like, okay, you've kept a cold distance to it, and you're not willing to like really sort out the details, of like you're not willing to get into the nitty gritty of it to like have an informed opinion about it. And so at that point, it's like, again, it's like, why should I care what you think? You've shown me like you have kept it at an arm's length. You've shown me that you don't want to get involved or even like think about it, And so you just use this casual, very, supposedly, like, quote, neutral statement about it. And so, I don't know. It's very frustrating. During the war, I had conversations with friends because I kind of became like the resident Armenian that like, like all these like people here like didn't know any other Armenian person. So they asked me about it, and I would tell them like, look, like this is what I know. And
me, on the other hand, I slid into Kim Kardashian's DMs trying to figure out, and it didn't work. So I'm glad that there are people nearby you that you could help. So.
But there were times where it's just like, but like I read this news and it said like, the conflict erupted. I was like, no, Azerbaijan started this war. Yeah, but it's not saying anywhere that Azerbaijan started it.
Yeah. I'm
like, so wait, you're saying like Armenia would launch an offensive in order to defend its territory? Like, I don't understand. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And also, like, there's even video of a guy, a reporter from Azerbaijan, as the fighting started. He was there on the ground. He reported it first. And it's like, clearly this was organized by the state to be like, okay, we're going to have like this person on the ground first. And they're going to say, oh, the Armenians started it. Right. Armenians didn't have anyone on the ground because they didn't know when it was going to happen. But this is also something that's like also, when it comes to like the Caucasus region, there's this feeling I think that like a lot of Armenians have that there are these like bigger powers who are kind of pulling the strings, and they have this like kind of region like kind of organized in a way where it's like there are kind of these backroom discussions happening that's normal, average, everyday people aren't privy to. Yeah. And so before the war started, there was an alert put on the U.S. Secretary of State's website. If you're in this region, like leave, don't travel there. There was like a travel advisory, basically.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's obviously things that, states know about. And when I think of like, okay, so these states like have the power, or they know that this is happening. They technically have the power to put a stop to it, but they just choose not to.
Yeah.
And the question is like, well, why?
Why the United States wouldn't stop a war, I don't know. That's beyond me.
I know, yeah.
But yeah, it really can like that's actually a really interesting thing that I've because like we've kind of viewed examples of this kind of like throughout history, whatever. Like this isn't just the only one of this. It's like the powers that be, how did they know this? And so yeah, I mean, like there is a lot of truth, I think, in the sense of that, but like that's something incredibly interesting that then I never like does that like create like a lot, just on a completely different note, does it like create like a lot of like conspiracy theories amongst like the Armenian general population, or like, because like my very first reaction is like, oh, we're gonna end up on like anti-Semitism very quickly, like the way that started.
Well, I mean, this is also something that Azerbaijan has tried very, very hard to do, is to paint Armenia as an anti-Semitic country. But I mean, back to this. I'll get to this like one incident that happened like recently that was really, really strange. But I mean, to answer the first point, yeah, I would say, yeah. And I mean, I think I can't necessarily say why, and I don't know if this is necessarily like it has a lot to do with that, but I think it's part of it is like, and again, this is coming from me. I can't speak for like a whole, entire population of people in Armenia. I mean, I have friends there, and like I've talked with them about this. But I mean, I only hear like a fraction of like the kind of thoughts and things that people are thinking there. Yeah. But I think you have like, on the one hand, like people I think are kind of paranoid about like, I mean, could there be an attack tomorrow? I don't know. People are still on edge. I think people also traumatized from what happened, and I think the combination of these things, it does lead your mind to wander. I think also there being a prime minister now where I mean, the majority, I think, of Armenians are pretty unhappy with him because he's just he was a former journalist, and now he's a politician. Now he's heading a state, and I just don't think he has the political wherewithal to defend the country.
That's what I've heard as well, that people are unhappy with like how he's responded to all of this, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it's there's this whole revolution, quote unquote revolution that happened. I mean, I think there was an Arab.
Is it the Velvet Revolution?
The Velvet Revolution, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I know enough about Armenia.
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
Good. Woo.
I mean, the thing is, I don't want to get too far into this because I feel like it is really just kind of an ancillary point. But I mean, I remember at that time, like when he came into power, like there were a lot of people saying, like, oh, this is like there's some sort of deal, and like there's some other things happening, and there's some coordination with like Russia, I'll bet, and that they want to see this guy. They want to like have like Armenians like get excited about like hey, we're finally like starting to have like a real democracy. On the other hand, I think some of them were like, okay, there's this guy who's been put in this position, but what are his credentials? Like, he doesn't have any experience in politics really. Yeah. And at the same time, I think maybe like there's this thinking of, if we have people's like hopes like set high like this, and then we just like leave it crashing down, they're gonna come back to like the former regime. They're gonna like even be more beholden to like, let's say, a country like Russia, because I mean the former leaders of Armenia, they were on good terms with Russia. One of the former leaders, Ciarán, he was like buddies with Putin. Yeah. So, I mean, again, this is all speculation. Like, and I cannot, say like, I can't put words in the mouths of like, whole entire population of like Armenians in Armenia. I mean, I've talked with like a few, who are specifically from Armenia, who have more of kind of like an inside, track into these sorts of things. But, yeah, I mean, conspiracies, like they do exist. They are everywhere. And I think like the Caucasus is kind of like this this region where I think people do feel like, hey, there's things happening at a higher level that we just don't know about.
It's great power politics rather than I mean, like this is something that I remember this discussion particularly with the lead up to Ukraine of when like America was accusing Russia of about to invade and Putin was demanding that this be discussed between Putin and Biden. Biden was at the time, yeah. That like it be discussion between America and Russia. And the kind of like journalists argument at the time against that was like, oh, you're ignoring Ukraine, you're leaving Ukraine out of this. And I'm like, I just kind of felt very Irish in that moment of just like, welcome to the real world. Like, unless you have like nukes, this is how most countries feel about things going on. Like, unless you're a part of the G8 or something. Like, I felt it very strongly when I moved from Ireland to the UK or like to Germany, or like people kind of feel like the trajectory of their country is 100% within their control or the government of that country.
Yeah. Well, also in that moment, like I said earlier, Ukrainians magically got agency like overnight, very quickly. Like they suddenly
beforehand they didn't.
Yeah. Beforehand they didn't have agency. Now magically they had maybe like everyone was a Ukraine expert like overnight.
But like it's pretty normal for like a country of 3 million people, a country of 4 million people. Like, you don't even have to have that much. Like, I'm sure like a lot of very populated African countries definitely feel this way. Like, where the politics of their like country, their state, their region is not really decided by them.
Yeah, that's why they all just left. What is it, ECOWAS or whatever, the economic thing that France set up. There's we're not talking about this about the Sahel.
We already did our episode on the.
No, we didn't.
Yeah, we did it on the French franc. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Forever ago. I mean, we talked about Wagner as well too.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I don't want to, give the impression that, okay, like the average, Armenian is, like their head is filled with conspiracies.
Oh, no.
But
we're
like
not,
it is, but it is like, I mean, I would say like there is this kind of feeling of like, well, there are higher powers at work here, and we don't necessarily have as much of a say in our own actions. And like I think there is also this thinking of, well, if that's the case, then maybe we should take things in our own hands, and so like there have been these, there have been protests in like recent years against Pashinyan, who's the prime minister, and his party. The thing is, like, there was a time where there were snap elections, and I think that was like the summer of 20, or maybe a little after the summer of 2021. I mean, the people, still voted in Pashinyan. And, so I mean, that was seen as kind of like this rebuke against like the former regime. I mean, the stories that I've heard from like, Armenians who lived there at that time, these were, there's a story about like, okay, they rolled in tanks and they basically, killed Armenians who were protesting. There's also another story about, like in the center of Yerevan, this guy like said, to Robert Kochayan, he said like, oh, hey, Rob, kind of addressed him like this kind of informal way.
Yeah.
And then apparently like, like Rob and his like entourage, or Robert, I shouldn't say Rob. He's gonna come find me.
Exactly. He did a Macron when someone called him Manu. Yeah, exactly.
Well, apparently like, like Robert told his entourage like, hey, go find this guy, and and basically this guy like went into the bathroom, and then like, the entourage like came in and then just killed him like in the middle of Yerevan.
Okay, Macron did not do that.
Yeah. but I mean, like these were the kind of, like, to give an idea of like, and these were the kind of people who were in power before,
Yeah.
I mean, so but they did have good relations with Russia. And I mean, this is where you have to start thinking about, well, okay, realpolitik like dictates that, Armenians should stick with, their allies. But at the same time, if those allies are kind of leaving them hanging, then where is Armenia supposed to go? And then like the West is like, oh, you can like, come like, join us and like be happy and merry and all this stuff. But like, there's never any sort of concrete sort of measures of, hey, or anything given where it's like, okay, this is what you will get from us.
Yeah.
When that is not on the table, then it's like Armenia's kind of stuck in this like, in limbo.
Yeah, I was actually like just very quickly. So like the whole this is a serious question. It's going to sound stupid coming out of my mouth. So like the whole like Putin New World Order thing that he's been going around like kind of marketing to Africa, especially. Like I think Africa's become like the continent where Putin's like, well, you know what? I'm not going to win over any more Western countries. Even Serbia doesn't like me. The new frontier for me, and because China's been incredibly influential in Africa with their soft power, economic, development and whatnot, and it's been very beneficial for them. I know plenty of people who have been like, China built a railroad and it rips, where Russia kind of can't really do the same.
Russia's strategy has always been very threadbare because, like, even with your guy Rob and before, it was just like that's the strategy he has with Belarus. The strategy he had with Ukraine before. You're on my end. All of Ukraine, all of Armenia can hate me. I just need the one guy.
I need the one
charge
dude. Yeah, exactly.
Who likes me? Yeah.
And so, but like, so for even like now, in the sense of like I mean. Where Armenia then currently is in the situation of like after everything that then has happened, they're not really. It seems like, at least from what you're telling me, is that then they're not really hopping on board to like the new Putin kind of parallel hegemony that he's apparently trying to build. That's like. Not that then to say that then like their friendship with Russia is still existing, I mean, there's clearly a relationship regardless of if they're being left out to dry.
But Azerbaijan,
exactly. But that's about it. Like
yeah.
It seems like that the relationship is at that. There's not going to be like, oh yeah, no, actually, yeah, Vladimir Putin, your whole counter hegemony, that sounds ripping awesome. We're gonna hop on board. That's like Armenia's not probably going to be there.
A nation of Dugunists.
Yeah.
I mean,
Again, you are answering for all 3 million Armenians.
Yeah.
I know, no pressure, right?
Yeah.
No. I mean, but just from like what, like your own
Your
personal
take,
opinion and take.
When the war broke out in like the Ukraine, like Russia-Ukraine war broke out. I mean, there were protests, in favor of Ukraine in Armenia. I mean, there have also been protests, in favor of Russia. I mean, there's also been demonstrations held where, Armenians gather in front of like the Opera Square, which is like this, big area, saying like, we stand like we're pro like EU, like what's her name? She came to Armenia. I think it was it Nancy? Yeah, but I think it was Nancy Pelosi. Oh. She was there. This was like during her I think shortly before she went to like Taiwan.
Yeah.
I can't, the Joker mode tour.
It was like around that time. But I mean, you had Armenians who were there who were like, keep her in the country, because if she's in the country, like Azerbaijan's not going to attack us.
I don't think Azerbaijan has enough Xanax to keep Nancy Pelosi at bay in the country. So
I like the idea of a nation state just strategically taking Nancy Pelosi hostage for their own self-defense.
But I mean, I think the point in all this that I'm trying to make is that like Armenia is kind of in the middle, and it's looking for. I mean, it's looking for some country that it can like make inroads with, who will also help bolster their security.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. And so, I mean, they're ready and willing and like, looking at it. I mean, I don't know if it's like it's a sort of feeling of desperation, but it's just, I think Armenians feel very much like they've been left alone.
Yeah.
Or that, in the case of like Azerbaijan, like it feels like Russia has chosen them to kind of be like, okay, you can, like, they've kind of been anointed, like, okay, we'll allow you to be like the hegemon in like, the Caucasus region. You can make all the political decision making, but, just don't do these like certain things or whatever, or whatever. Whereas
Keep the genocide to a minimum. Like,
so I mean it's I don't know. I think it's just it's really tough. It's a really tough situation because again, like this kind of isolation has occurred, I think, in large part because of like Turkey and Azerbaijan. So I think, like, it makes it tough.
Yeah, because like I was gonna say like an advanced version of this politics, but it's not really advanced. But like a possible path Armenia can go down is like what clearly happens in Georgia, where like the entire liberal population is fully aware of the great game politics and are just like waving EU flags, just like Georgia in EU now. That is like it is the thing that is going to protect us against Russia, give us favor in things like South Ossetia and Abkhazia and things like that. And then like for me, I guess the reason why, or like my thought about why Armenia wouldn't just like fully lean into that is probably purely Turkey being like this member of NATO, the strategic partner of the EU that we have allowed them to get away with so much bullshit in the past. Like I said earlier,
they literally control the north of Cyprus, and we're fine with it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this earlier of like, what else has Turkey done? It's like, oh, they're occupying a country. They just straight up.
Yeah, this is also something. I mean, if you look at like the map and you look at like, okay, in the last like decade, which countries surrounding Turkey has Turkey had like belligerent sort of like, back and forth with? Like there was one time I was on a work trip to Athens, and when I was there, like Erdogan made a statement like, hey, we can fire a missile any time and like hit Athens. And I was just like, dude, I'm just here on like with like a few work colleagues, like.
No, he knows you're there.
No, but it's like
I heard an Armenian landed here. Done.
I've been monitoring the Armenian levels of Greece, and we need to.
They're getting too high.
I mean, it's like the one
mixed
time
up. It's mixed up with all the like the unpure Greek blood, but I see it.
But it's like the one time I'm in Athens, and it's just like, what the hell, man? Like, you kidding me? Like, this is crazy. Like, I mean, of course, a logical person would be like, okay, there's no way that this would happen without like huge recrimination from like entire NATO. But I mean, it's still just like, I think a sign of like how Turkey approaches politics in this really, really aggressive way. And it's it's just a big bully. And like, again, like, like Northern Cyprus, I mean, that history, I mean, it's funny, I've asked like Turkish friends about this, like what they think. They have a pretty particular like sort of history that they dredge up, and I'm just like, that's not like that's not what happened. Like, I'm sorry, this is not the case. And I don't know, it again, I think a lot of like this stuff that's happening, especially like between like Armenia and Azerbaijan, I'm sure like also with like what's happening in like Cyprus and Northern Cyprus, it's like a question of, okay, well, how is the history written? How do people perceive it all?
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the first part of this episode. I know that it was like almost an hour and a half conversation that we had. And just once more, a reminder that the second part of this episode will be available on Thursday. And Hovsep did shout out at the end of the episode a lot of journalists and such that he felt were worth following. And I thought that I would, just put them into this episode as well, too, so that then if you're only able to hear the first episode, you can then still, know who to tap into. So these will all be available below in the description. And just wanted to, quickly shout out Tigran Grigorian, Karina Avidasan, Lauren Bors of people that he would say as go-to analysts for the topic, and some other journalists are Sirashun Sargasyan, Marut Varyan, Lindsay Snell, Rasmus Kanbeck, Neil Hauer, Jake Harahan, and Samson Matirason. And also, he suggested a film called Ghosts of Karabakh by Jake Harahan. I am really bad at pronouncing Armenian last names. I am very sorry. Jake Hanrahan. I believe that would be Armenian. And so if you are happening to be one of these people and I did butcher your last name, I am so very sorry. Hovsep pronounces your name correctly in the second part of this episode. And so tune in then on Thursday when we have it out. If you're not already a Patreon member, please join. And we will see you then on Thursday. Take care.